Okay, I'll start things off, and as people come in and out and things like that, I'll go through what we're going to discuss, what I'm going to show you, and just kind of what I'm hoping for some of the takeaways and what we're going to do in this session. Primarily, I wanted this to be more demo orientated rather than me presenting some slides and telling you about Extension Kit and AppStudio and things like this. I wanted this to be more of a hands-on, here's how you use it, here's how I would go about building an extension kit, here's some of the features, so you actually get to have a nice look at what's in place and what you can use. I want it to be interactive as well, and that's going to depend on yourselves. If you've got questions, if you want to know anything else, if you want me to look at anything, then please raise your hand, drop a question in the question. I think there should be a question and answers section that you should be able to ask things in, and feel free to do that at any time. And if I can demonstrate something, if I can show it then and there, I will do. And if you've got a lengthier question that I believe I can add you to be able to speak, and you can, if you want to, you can ask your question in person as well. So let's get going. Just a first introduction to myself. I'm Peter Davis. Hopefully, will I be sending a link to the recording after the session? Yes, I will be. I think it's going to be recorded automatically, and it may be that Zoom will send you a link to that recording. If not, I will be saving the recording myself and probably putting it up on our Tech4 YouTube channel. That's what I did with our previous webinar. So yeah, it should be available for you, so feel free to share that, and again, I'll post that on LinkedIn once it's up there. So that's okay. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm Peter Davis. Some of you I know, some of you are new to me. I worked for Unit4 for about 12-13 years. Started off in the development maintenance team, looking after UK products and other UK customization, and moved on from there to become a senior technical consultant, where I was building customization for users, and that ranged across all of the subject areas in business world. So financials, project, time and expenses. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in every business area of the product. I focus mainly on the technical aspects, so things to do related to integrations, Act customization, things like that. So I've been working with the product for probably around 20 years or so. Started with Aggresso 5.4 and have gone on from there. Primarily, as I say, I'm involved in Act customization, and more recently the integrations with web APIs using the public REST APIs and things. And those are the aspects we're going to look at today, and really get down into how you can use that new functionality. I started a consulting, Tech4 consulting, with my colleagues Andrew Woodhead and Elizabeth Taylor, who you may also know as Elizabeth Witter, and Catherine Oliver. We're all ex-Unit4 people, and again, you may know some of us or all of us from various other training courses and things like that. Myself and Andy focus mostly on customization, integration of the product. Elizabeth is our reporting expert, and she's probably trained a lot of the customer base in report creation. And with Tech4, we provide those kind of services, technical consulting services, as well as product-based services. So check out our website and have a look at things, and feel free to contact me after the session as well if you want to learn more. But let's dive into things, and I'm going to share my screen now, or share a portion of my screen. Right, and hopefully you should be able to see a desktop with Extension Kit running. What I'm going to go through with you today is I'm going to start with Extension Kit. I'm running within an ERPx environment for this. The Extension Kit stuff will work on ERP7 as well as ERPx, depending on what you're licensed for. The AppStudio work that I'm going to show later is purely a ERPx only tool. At the moment, anyway, I don't believe there's any plans to bring that to ERP7. That could change in the future, but from my understanding, it is ERPx only. So I'm going to start with Extension Kit, and the main thing is just to show you the process that I would go through in building a Extension Kit flow, how I'd get started, the tools that I would use to build out that flow, to really give you an understanding of what the functionality is, what the capabilities are, and how you should do it. And then we're going to transition into AppStudio to work around a similar area. In this instance, I'm going to be doing all working around the supplier master file. And if you've seen some of my previous courses, or I recently launched a web API training course, I do a lot of my work in the supplier master file because it's fairly easy. And it's a nice data set to work with. So the first thing we're going to do, we are going to build a small extension kit flow, which is going to pick up on the creation of a supplier master file, and it's going to validate the VAT registration number that's put against that master file against the HMRC VAT registration. So we're going to be looking at picking up on an event in ERP happening. We're going to be punching out to an external API, and then we're going to be sending emails to users explaining to them whether something is valid or not, and we're going to be going through the motions of actually creating that. I have one I prepared earlier just in case anything goes wrong. Doing live demos is always a bit risky, so we'll have our fingers crossed that nothing will go wrong, but I do have stuff to show you just in case. But let's get started. If you've never seen Extension Kit before, this is it, basically. You have an area where you can create flows. The AppStudio is now available directly through Extension Kit, and you've got various other options around parameters, certificates, mapping tables, and we might talk about some of those later. But primarily in this instance, we're going to look at flows, and we're going to look at creating a new flow. And new flows can be, or extension kit flows can replace things that you may have done previously in ERP7, and we're using things like Intel Agent or scheduled events and aspects like that. They allow you to do various tasks in the system when certain things happen. So in this instance, as I specified, I'm going to be looking at the creation of a supplier master file, and I'm going to be looking at the VAT registration when that is created. So let's go ahead. You'll always start with, or I should say, we'll give our flow a name first, just so it stands out from the crowd in my flows. And then we get to choose a trigger. And we have message hub events, we have scheduled events. If you can see that properly, sometimes the writing goes a bit skew-off, but we've got message hub events, we've got scheduled events, and we've got webhooks. Webhooks allow you to actually create a link that is visible to the outside world that you can follow, and it will fire off a extension kit flow. Scheduled events are much like the scheduler within ERP7, where you can set something to happen at certain times, so daily, hourly, whatever you want to choose. A message hub events, the one that we're going to be looking at, allow you to hook onto events that are happening in the system itself. So we're going to choose a message hub event. We're going to choose our source system. There's a lot of stuff in here. I'm running on a developer version of ERPx at the moment that Unit4 provide us with. So you're going to see a lot of stuff in here that you wouldn't see in your environments. So there's a lot of, for instance, in this area where I'm choosing my source system, there's a lot of stuff in here which is not relevant. All I know is that the U4 ERP is the one that we want to go for. You then have a message type you can choose. This can be either document or event. Events are things that are fired within the application, and you can actually, I believe you can publish your own events as well, mainly by creating something that calls an event that doesn't exist in the system. It will then create an event, and then you can later use that to run a flow from. I haven't used them as much. I tend to use either the document-based events or the other option, so either a scheduled flow or a webhook. So I'm going to go for document in this case. And what you'll see when you open this document is you'll see a list of effectively all the documents that are within ERP7 or ERPx. So you've got your absences, you've got your accounts, account rules. We're going to look for suppliers. It should be down the end here somewhere. Yeah, so we're going to go for supplier. And basically what that means is this is going to put a hook onto the supplier document. So anytime a supplier document changes or is updated, this will be triggered. So that will be whether the supplier is updated or whether it's created. And we'll be told by the event which one of those happened. So the first thing I will normally do when creating a flow from scratch is I will simply create my flow with an event hook. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a stop execution on the end. And that's all I'm going to do for the moment. The reason I do it this way is this then allows me to see what information is going to be passed to me when I actually run the flow. So what we'll do is we'll hop into ERPx and we'll create a supplier, and fingers crossed, our flow will actually run. I say fingers crossed because what you'll find is not all documents that are listed in that drop-down of being able to hook onto will actually publish an event when they're updated. So it can be slight trial and error. But in this instance, we're going to hope it's going to work. So we're going to have our supplier ID. We're going to call this webinar test. I'll give it a supplier group, and all I'm going to do is put in the, if I can type things correctly, I'm going to put in the bare minimum I need to be able to create a supplier. So let's put in a couple of things. I'm going to have to put in at least one address, and that's it, I believe. So if we save that, we can say yes to the supplier group. Yep. And we're going to auto number. We're going to get a message saying that there's no IBAN, bank account, and those kind of things, but we don't care in this instance. So we've created our supplier 3053. So let's go to our flow. We look at our history, and you can see that this has actually run. So we can click on this, and we should be able to see that, yep, this is the data that will be given to you when the flow runs, and we can see that it was a supplier message. The change type was added to say it was created, it was a new supplier, and the supplier ID was 3053, which is all correct. And then we've actually got the full supplier object that was created at the time, or at least most of that supplier object. So this now gives me an indication of what data I'm going to begin to play with now. So as I said, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see whether the VAT registration number is valid or not that was put against it. So at the moment, we can see there's a VAT registration number and it's blank. So let's begin to use this. One of the things you want to do is, and Extension Kit allows you to do, is for most fields, there's a plus button, and this plus button will give you various bits of information from your flow, from your parameters, from other various areas. So you can just click on and use them. To be able to get the information from this step, we need to parse that JSON so that the flow knows what it is, knows what all the data is in it, and then we can use it more easily at the next steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new section, and I'm going to move this into as the second step, and I'm going to look for the JSON parse action. and we're going to say the content or the source is going to, the source of the schema we're going to use to parse this JSON is content. And what I'm going to do is I could just start creating a schema in here or load in one that I've got elsewhere, but instead I will generate this via some JSON. So let's hop back to my history, and I'm going to say step 1, here's the bit of JSON that I want to use from the properties, because this will allow me to tell whether the supply was created or whether it was updated. So I'll take this and drop into the JSON parser, and I'm going to say, generate a schema for me from a bit of JSON. And there you go. It generates the schema. And then I can say the source of this JSON was our step 0. All the steps in the flow are numbered. So we can see 0.message_hub event. This is step 0. And it knows that there was a properties in there. So I'm going to click on the properties. And that's going to basically parse the data that came through in that properties area and allow me to use it elsewhere. What we're also going to want to do is parse other bits of information like this body. So we can do that in another step. But the reason we do the properties is I can now add a new action. I can set this to JSON parse it again. And this is where we're going to parse the body. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a filter on this. And you get a filter and a condition before every step in an extension kit flow. And this allows you to tailor what happens next in the flow. Filters will prevent the flow from continuing entirely. So in this instance, what we want to say is we're only going to activate this flow when a supplier is created. We're not going to do it when a supplier is modified. So we're going to put a filter on it to say, check to see if it was added. If it is, carry on. Otherwise, stop entirely. If I'd done it as a condition, that condition applies to the subsequent step. So if I said the same thing on a, parse this JSON, if the supply was added, if it wasn't added, it would skip that step and then continue on with the rest of the flow, whereas the filter is going to stop the flow entirely. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add a filter. And if I start typing in some curly brackets, it's going to bring back all the options I have. And now what you can see is I've got step 1 parsed content. So this is coming out of this JSON parse and giving me all of those fields that were in that properties object. So I can look at change type, and I can say, if this is equal to added, so it's now going to look at that thing. If it's equal to added, we're going to continue on. If it was any other value, it's going to drop out at that point. So let's quickly generate some more, another schema, and I'm going to do this based on the body. So let's take this bit of code, copy that, generate by JSON again, so that it's going to create me a schema based on that chunk of JSON. And I'm going to say this, the content you're looking at is from the body section. And I'll save the flow again, and let's hop back into ERPx, and let's look at our supplier. I think it was 3053, wasn't it? Webinar test. So if we update the supplier name and save this, what we should do is our flow should fire again on the update event. So let's go through to the extension kit. Let's go through to our history. And indeed it did. We can see it here. And what you can see is the flow stopped due to a filter not matched. So modified was not equal to add. So therefore, we correctly identified that in this properties, the change type was not the value we wanted, so we've actually stopped processing. And this is really useful that you can build a nice flow, but if you want to limit it on working only in certain events and things, you can add these filters to stop it processing, so stop it churning through data it shouldn't be. So now we know if I add a new supplier, this is going to run. So we've got our event to figure out that we're going to run, and we've now passed the data, so we've now got the VAT registration number. So from now, we need to actually check in with HMRC to see if that VAT registration number is valid or not. So for that, we're going to have to call an external API. And what I've got here is I've got a link to the HMRC VAT check number API. And this is just something that is public. It's public facing. This one, in fact, doesn't need any authentication to run. You can just connect to it and test it yourselves. And if we scroll down the documentation and look at the API endpoints, we can see one of the first options is get a VAT registration. And it gives us the URL. So there's organizations, VAT, check VAT number, lookup, and then there's a curly brackets. You've got to provide it with a VAT registration number. So let's grab this API. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Postman, which is a tool you may or may not have come across. If you look at my web API training that I've just published on our Tech4 Learn World site, I cover Postman in detail there on how to use it. And it basically allows you to run API queries within a tool and look at the results and do whatever you want. So we'll quickly add a new request, and we're going to call this HMRC, and we're going to paste in our VAT check, and we're just going to run it, and we'll put some dummy data into first. So we send that out, and you can see it's already responding to us, and it's saying this is an invalid request because your VAT registration number must be 9 to 12 digits long. Notice the status. We're getting a 400 back because there was an error in this case. This is going to become key for us when we hop back to our flow. If we change this to be 9 characters long, we get a 404 message back. This means our VAT registration number was of the correct format, but it wasn't found in the system. So we get a 404. So we either get a 400, I think it was a 400, or a 404. So these are the ones we want to look out for. Now, if I drop in there the Tech4 VAT registration number, it's going to respond with some information about Tech4 consulting. And notice in here, we've got a status code of 200. What this suggests is that actually we only need to worry about the return code to figure out whether we need to do something or not. So let's go back to our extension kit flow and let's actually call this API. So we're going to add a new action, and this one's going to be a HTTP request. And I'm going to drag this up into our list. HTTP requests are basically web API requests. You can think of them as they could be calling something like a web service as well, a SOAP web service, but in this instance, it's a web API. So we're going to say there's no authentication in this instance. It's a get method, and then the URL we need. So we need this chunk. So the start of the URL. And then at the end, we want to put our VAT registration number. And we've got that because in step 2, we're parsing our data that came back to us. So we've got a VAT registration number, which we can put in. So Extension Kit's going to put that in as it calls the flow. Let's add a new action. And what we're going to do is we're going to send off an email if that VAT registration number was valid or if it was invalid. In most instances, you'd probably only send off an email to someone to get them to check it if it was invalid, but we're going to do both just to make things easier for us. So what we're finding here is there's an email sender, and I'm just going to put my own email address in here. And what I can do is I can say supplier ID, and I can again bring in my parsed content of the supplier ID. So supplier ID, and the first thing we're going to say is invalid VATNO. And then within the body, we can say something like supplier. Let's go and grab their supplier name, invalid VATNO of, and again, we'll put in what we found. So VAT registration number. And what I'm going to do on here is I'm going to do a condition on this one. So I'm going to say the condition of this email being sent out, we're going to look at the return result of the third step. So if we go down to step 3, you see we got a status code. We're not caring about the data that came back. All I need to know is the status code. So I'm going to say, if the status code is not equal to 200, i.e. isn't equal to a success, then we're going to send out an email. What I'll do is I'll add another action then, and this will again be an email sender, and we'll say to myself again, and then we'll say supplier, go and grab our supplier ID again, supplier ID, and we'll just say all okay. Supplier details okay. Okay, we'll save this flow. And again, for this one, we're going to add another condition onto here, and we're going to say where the step 3 status code was equal to 200. So this email will be sent out if we got something back that wasn't 200, and the other email will be sent out if we got a 200. So that shows the difference between a filter and a condition as well. Our filter up here stops the entire flow, whereas our conditions only stop the subsequent step. So let's save this and let's see if this actually does what we're expecting it to do. So let's create a new supplier, and we're going to say web test 2. We're going to give them a supplier group, and what we'll do is we'll leave the company registration number blank, or the VAT registration number blank, because we don't really need anything in there to prove that it's going to not work. Add a contact information, save that again. So we got 3054. So let's hop back to our extension kit and let's see if we ran. We did. So what you can see is this time we went through all our steps and it skipped step number 5. So step number 5 was our successful email out. But we had a 404 response back because no VAT registration number was found. So we didn't run that step, but we did run the other step, the invalid step. And in fact, if I was to grab this, so this is the email that has just come through to me from Extension Kit. So supplier ID 3054, invalid VAT number. And you can see that we had an invalid VAT number of a blank. There wasn't anything in there. So if we quickly go and test the opposite and call this web test 3. That's free. Just, oh, that'll do. Add another one and save this. So we save that. Let's go to our history again. And we get another run. And of course, I was so keen I didn't put the VAT registration number in, did I? That's always the way. I knew I was gonna, if that's my one mistake today, that'll be fine. I have the test 4. I have the test 4. And let's put in VAT registration, and let's put the Tech4 one in here just to make sure that this worked okay. Contact information, and go back to our history. We've got a run. Good. And this time we skipped step 4. So we skipped the step that's if there was an error, and we can actually look at the request that was made to HMRC, and we can see the details that we brought back. So this was correct. And indeed, if we look at our emails, we've had a supplier 3056, all okay. And that's it. That's really extension kit flows. I'm just going to bring this up just in case anything happens. So this is a kind of a whistle-stop tour of creating a flow and how I would go about doing that. So building it up step by step, testing each step as I go, looking at the data that's coming back, deciding what I want to use later on in the flow, and building from there. So this is now going to sit in the system, and this will monitor suppliers being created. It will be calling out to HMRC to check that VAT registration number, and emailing people appropriately. So this would probably be something that would go to sort of an AP team or similar to monitor data coming in. VAT registration numbers maybe not a good thing to do because there is already aspects of the system which can check those things for you. But as an example to go on, it proves the point of using Extension Kit to punch out to external sources. So that's good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on from Extension Kit and have a quick look at AppStudio. Again, ERPx only. If you've got any questions about that Extension Kit flow, feel free to ask them. Wait till the end and ask them now if you want to, and we can pick anything up. Otherwise, I'll start moving on to the AppStudio aspects. And this, again, as I mentioned, this sits within the Unit4 Extension Kit product now, and allows AppStudio there to allow you to create effectively custom forms. In ERP7, you're probably very familiar with creating forms based on flexi-field groups and similar to that. This is another way of doing that, and kind of a replacement for forms. In ERP7, we had quite a bit of flexibility on forms because there were tools, at least in the UK, where we had auto form population things where we could go out and we could create a form and we could run database queries when people tab through fields and things like that. But that was a custom solution sitting on top of normal forms. And of course, that's not applicable in ERPx. So instead, they've begun to introduce the AppStudio to allow you to create forms which can not only run within ERPx, but can also be self-published as external forms, which you can just provide a link to, so someone outside of your organization can go and look at those forms, fill the data in, and submit things if they wanted to. I would demonstrate the forms display in ERPx, but unfortunately that functionality doesn't seem to be working in my environment at the moment. It was about a week ago, it isn't now. The forms will go into there, or the AppStudio screens will show up on the menu, but when you click on them, nothing happens and some errors appear in the logs and things. This is probably mainly specific to our environment, because I say we're using a development environment, a developer version of ERPx, which is quite often in flux and used in lots of different things. So things tend to work and not work on a regular basis. But also it points to the fact that AppStudio itself is quite a new tool, and although it's been launched, I would probably say it's still in kind of a beta version. They're still updating it. They're still adding functionality as they go. So what we're going to do in this instance is we're going to create a form that will create a supplier in the system so that it links in nicely with our extension kit flow. But it's going to pull in details from company's house to be able to create that supplier without you having to type in lots of information. So let's have a go at this. Let's create a new app, and we're going to say this is going to be supplier creation, and this can be supplier creation as well. And this is the screen now that AppStudio runs in. It's a very what you see is what you get editor. So you'll be dragging and dropping fields into here and adjusting things within a very visual interface. So let's have a look at this. On the left-hand side, we've got our layers. These are basically all the components that are within this AppStudio application or this screen. You've got the components that you can actually add to the screen. So buttons, text input fields, and then layout options. In the center of the screen, we've got actually the editor of what this is going to look like. And we're actually going to be building it up through here. And this editor allows you to switch the view to see what it's going to look like on, say, an iPad or a phone screen or a desktop screen. The properties, when you add elements to the site, components to the page, you can adjust their properties here. And then you've got our other aspects, which are resources and logic flow, which I'm going to go through when we need them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop a panel onto the screen. And this is basically just a layout to kind of give us a nice screen to start with. We get a title and a subtitle. So we're going to call this supplier creation, and we give it a title of simple supplier creation, because we're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the user in this instance. Now what you can do is we've got a content panel here. I can start dragging and dropping fields into this content panel however I want. What I would suggest you use is some of the layout options. So for instance, I mainly use the row and the columns. The reason I do that is it allows you to better lay out your screen. What you can see when you've dropped aspects in is they appear in the layers window, so you can actually find where they are. You can grab them, move them about, you can copy them, you can delete them. In this instance, I'm going to get rid of them because I'm going to put some more aspects in. But as you can see, it's a simple interface of dragging and dropping. So let's add a row so that we can begin to organize our fields. And we're also going to draw a column into that row because we may want fields next to each other. But in this instance, we're just going to have one field to start with, and we're going to do that in the next section. So what do we want to do here? We want to bring in details from company's house to pre-populate values on this supplier screen. So what we need to do is we need to make use of the company's house API. And if I open another tab, this is it. Company's house provide a REST API for a publicly accessible REST API for bringing back company data. And this is the same data that if you were to perform a company's house lookup on the web, you could get access to for free. But this is just an API version of that. And if we scroll down, we can go to the developers API suite and find the Companies House public data API. And this is then showing us, these are all the endpoints that are available to us to find details about a company. And in our instance, what we want to do is we want to get the company profile information. So there's a get call here, and it tells us this is the URL you need to use. And in this instance, it's saying this also requires a API key. So unlike the HMRC, the VAT registration API, where you can just call it and it will respond whoever you are, Companies House, you need an API key. So I've already done that. I've set up an account with Companies House and created an API key for me to use. So let's have a look at this to start with. And again, we're going to use Postman for this. So let's copy the request and let's create a new request in Postman to see what we're getting here. Company's House, and I will paste in my details. The company number is the thing that we're going to set. In this instance, as I said, you require an API key to actually use this. It's passed in as basic authentication for this API, which is a little different than you might see with other APIs where they require bearer tokens, but we'll have a look at those aspects as well. In this instance, we're going to choose basic auth, and I've actually got an environment variable that's set up as a Companies House API key, and it doesn't have any password. That's all you need to pass in. So let's have a look at this. What we'll do is, and I think that number is correct. Yeah, so this number is the Tech4 Companies House record. So if I send that with our API key, it's going to go away, query Companies House. And as you can see, it's going to bring back various bits of information about Tech4 Consulting. All of the stuff that you would get if you just ran a Companies House query, you will get back. So what we want to do is we want to have our user input a company ID, and then we'll go and get this Companies House information and use that to populate our supplier master file that we're going to create. So let's head back to Extension Kit and let's create a field to allow them to input that information. So we grab text input and we're going to drop that into the screen. Now notice when you're moving around on here, you might be able to see it on your thing. You get these green lines will appear showing you where the field is going to go. These can be a little fickle, the laying out of these screens, and you'll sometimes try and put something in a column and it won't go in a column. So you have to move them about and shuffle them around to get them into the right place. And also some things won't go into certain areas. So here we've created a panel layout. If I try to put a text input into the footer, I can't. I get a red line. I can't do that. But I could put a button into the footer. So there's some control on the screen, but you may have to play about with that a bit. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to change the ID of this field to be Companies House number. And so that's going to be its name, and this allows us to identify it when we want to drag this information in elsewhere. And again, the label is going to be Companies House node. You can use a placeholder or not. This is basically what's going to show to the user on the screen when they're looking to input something. So you may want to put some information here. You can provide a description, which is going to be shown underneath the field if you need to provide the user some more information. You can default in values. So if you want a value in there to start with that they can change if they want to, you can do that. And then you'll also see that there's things like styles, where you can change the formats of the field, validations and interactions. So I can set these fields to be read-only or hidden. And we'll have a look at a couple of those shortly as well. But for the moment, we're just going to have our Companies House number and we're going to bring that in. I'm going to save that. How do we actually call this company's house API from AppStudio? This is all handled in the resources area. So if we click on the resources tab and we add a new resource, we can give this a name, and we're going to say company's house lookup. And then it's going to ask us what the type of object this is going to be. A plain object is just some JSON that you can set in the background, and I'm actually going to show that shortly. HTTP is a web API request, and then ERPx public API is actually calling back into your own ERPx system. So let's go with HTTP because that's the one we need to use, and let's take our details from Postman that we used here. So we're going to grab our URL, and we need to put the company number on the end of that. So again, if we use the plus sign, we get a field and we get a company's house number because that's the field we were using, and we get a value. So we can choose that, and that's going to pass in whatever the user put in there into this request. The method is going to be a GET request. And this is a bit of a funny in this instance. The authentication type is a basic request. But if I choose basic, I'm allowed to choose credentials, and credentials are set up elsewhere in the system. So if I save this, within your system, you can look at credentials and you can create credentials that can be reused throughout your application. The only problem is in Company's House, their credentials, all they need is a username, which is your API key, but they don't want a password. And as you can see on this screen, password is a mandatory field. So I have to give it some sort of value, and that will actually then fail the Company's House lookup, which is a slight problem for us. So how do we get around that kind of thing? Well, if we head back over to our setup, what we can do is we can say that the authentication type is none in this instance, and we can manually provide HTTP header information. And if we head back over to our Postman call and we look at our headers, and so these are the headers that are sent through, you can see we've got an authorization header, and this is what gets sent through as that authorization header. So I can just copy this, I can drop back into here, and I can manually put an authorization header in here and give it a value. And that's going to allow me to bypass the credentials aspect and just send, manually send those credentials. What else do we want to do here? The content definition, this would be the data we're sending. We're only sending a value within the URL, so we don't need to worry about that. We're not going to send any content, but we do want to use the results that come back. So like we did in Extension Kit, we're going to use the templating schema. And again, I'm going to hop back to Postman where I've created this. I'm going to look at the JSON I got back. And I'm going to say, generate me a schema from this JSON. And it's going to go ahead and do that. And that's it. That's going to run and it will get our value. Now, when these get calls and things run, has had some changes in AppStudio. Previously, when you would perform any event on the screen, so push a button, you would tab through a field, all the get calls in your resources would get fired at that moment. That's changed with the introduction of this logic flow system. However, from what I've seen in my testing, when I tab out of the first field, it will always run the first GET request in the system. So I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm not sure what the ideas are around this and how they've laid these things out, but that's what's happening at the moment. And let's find out if this was run or not by actually displaying the results that are returned. So I'm just going to put a ruler in here, and as you can see, I can't quite get one in the right place. There we go. I'm going to add a new row, and I'm going to add 2 columns in this instance, because I'm going to put a couple of bits of data in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another text input field into the first column, and this is going to be called company name. This is text input. I'm not going to have any placeholder, but the default value is going to come from my company's house lookup. And if I scroll through that, because we've parsed the information that's coming back, I can choose company name. So what that's going to do is when that GET request fires, it's going to populate the company's name into this text input field. And because I'm populating this myself, I'm going to make this a read-only field. So let's save this, and let's see if it actually works. We can hit the preview button, and what this is going to do is it's going to launch it in its own window, so that we can actually test out this AppStudio screen and see if it actually works. Sometimes it takes a little while to build up these things, but here you go. We've come in, we've got a screen up and running. So let's grab our Tech4 company number, tab out of there, and magically it's put Tech4 Consulting Limited in the company name. So our request to company's house has worked in this instance. We've been able to look up the value we wanted. So that's great. We're on the way to creating our simple to use supplier creation script. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm only going to look at 2 other things, because I realize I'm probably going to overrun on time a little bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow them to update the supplier code. So for this instance, I'm going to choose a select field, and I'm going to query the attribute values to get all of the supplier groups that I can select, because I'm going to allow them to manually choose a supplier group. So for this, I'm going to add a new call, which is going to be a ERPx call in this instance. And this is a new feature that's only recently come into AppStudio, which allows you to run calls directly against your ERPx environment. Now, I know that if we looked at our Swagger definition, if you haven't looked at this again, the Web API course I've just published is a really good resource for this. You can query various objects in the system, and there's an attribute values object, which is this one here, which is an OData object, which allows us to choose what we want to bring back. In this case, we want to bring back the attribute values and the descriptions. So let's give this a go. We can choose from our list of objects, and there we go. We've got our attribute values. It's a GET call. It's using the correct API. And we can look at the parameters, and we get the same parameters that we could see in Swagger. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go and we're going to get the attribute value. That's what we're going to select. And we're going to select the, I believe it's just a description. Yep. And I'm going to filter on this where the attribute ID is equal to, and I believe it's AV for supplier groups. So what that's going to do is it's just going to bring me back a list of supplier group IDs and their descriptions. The templating schema, again, this is where we're getting our information back. It defaults to providing you with all the details. In this instance, I don't want all the details. I only want a small amount of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Swagger, and I'm going to test this call. So let's say attribute value description, and I'm going to say filter on attribute ID is equal to AV. To call an ERPx API, I need a token, and I've already got an IDS token called within Postman, where we're querying the IDS endpoint, we're providing our client ID and our secret, and we get a access token. And that's what I need to be able to call ERPx APIs. So let's just add this in. These tokens are things that you'd be able to get from Unit4, and they should provide those details. And there you go. We've run our quick query, and we've got our details back. So let's grab this. Let's generate a more simple schema from this, and we'll head back into our canvas. So the select screen, this is going to be our supplier group. And we'll save that, and supplier group. And what you can see is it's asking us, where is the information for this select field coming from? And what we can say is this is coming from resource 2, because I didn't give it a fancy name in this instance. The value field, because we've generated our schema, we're choosing the value is going to be attribute value, and the what it's going to display is the description. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go into this logic flow screen, and I'm going to say the options are limited on here at the moment. There's not much here, but we can run events on launch. So this will run on the launch of the screen. So on launch, we want to run a HTTP request, and this is going to be get supply groups, and it's going to run our resource 2 request. We can drag a line, and so when we open up the screen, it's going to run this, get our data, and populate our dropdown. So let's save this again, and let's see if this all worked okay. So we'll preview our screen. I'm going to close that previous one and wait for this to load up. It wants me to log in. So what we can see is we can go and get our company details again, and our supplier group now is populated with those details we return back again. So we can choose what supplier group we want this supplier to be created with. So we're almost there. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create the supplier. And the way we do that, we're going to grab all our information from the existing ones we've created and just add the details we want to. So within our Swagger definition of the APIs, we've got a suppliers area, and we've got a get call. What you'll find with APIs is there's a post call, which is the create, and there's a get call. And at least in the ERP environment, the data returned by the get is what you need to post in to create a supplier. So let's go and grab one of our suppliers that we created last time, 3054, I believe. And I'm just going to add my bearer token. Just grab that again. And let's try this out. And there we go. So this is the data we need to post back into the system to create a new supplier. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of this. I close this window, and I'm going to go back into our extension kit, and I'm going to go to resources, and I'm going to create a new resource, and this is going to be create supplier, and it's going to be a public API call again. It's going to be the suppliers call. There's a post there, and here's where we actually set the content definition. So this is what we're going to be posting back into the system. So let's just paste in all our data we just took out, and let's tweak a couple of these aspects. So we're going to take out the supplier name, and we're going to grab the company name that we've brought in from company's house and make sure that these quotes work correctly. And what I'm going to do is for the supplier ID, I'm going to set this to be new because I want it to create a new supplier ID. I'm just going to fill in some blanks, the alias. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the supplier group. So this is going to come in from our select field, the value from there. And also on our related values, there's a supplier group. So I'm going to change that to be from that field as well. We don't need a related ID. And in theory, that should be it. The templating schema, this is going to be what is returned to us. So we're going to have a look at that. But hopefully that should be our creation. So let's quickly save this, head back to the canvas, add a button. And this button is going to, I think we'll leave it as, let's call it create supplier. And what you'll see is when you hit a button, you get another logic map icon. Click on this and we can say, oh, there's a click event. I want to run a HTTP request. Join these lines up. And this is going to be create supplier. And we can choose the resource that we want to create. So that's the one we just created. And then we're going to pop up a window, whether it worked or not. So this is going to be our success. There's just going to be one button. It's going to be a success screen. And all it's going to say is supplier created. Supplier created. So we can drag success tick, and this can be supplier error. So if we get any problems when we created it, or one thing I do want to be in here is supplier created and provide you with the supplier ID that came back from the call. So we were able to select that as well. This error is going to be just error, because if it doesn't return a 200 or similar success message, it's going to generate this error. So let's save that. And let's see if this works. We'll hit the preview button again and wait for it all to fire up. And what we're hoping is we're going and getting information from company's house. We're going and getting information from the attributes and from other areas in the system. And we're going to create a supplier based on all that information. So we put in our company's house ID. We choose domestic suppliers. We hit create supplier. And this is now gone away, and it's called a post on the suppliers master file, and it created one. So we got a 3057 has come back. So we've actually created our supplier. And in fact, just to show that everything is working correctly, I've even received an email to say supplier ID 3057 has been created and there was an invalid VAT number. So the circle is complete now for this flow. We've created a flow which activates on the addition of a supplier master file, processes that and sends some messages depending on whether the VAT number was correct or not. We've then created a AppStudio screen which goes and gets information from various places and allows for a simple creation of a supplier. And we could look at this. So 3057, if I go back into our ERPx login, and we head to the supplier master file and say 3057. There we go. We've got our Tech4 Consulting Limited supplier that has been created from that screen. So the fingers crossed worked. Everything worked as expected. So that is a real whistle-stop tour of Extension Kit flows and AppStudio screens. Slightly longer than I was planning it to be, but there's quite a lot there to fill in. So I'm hoping that was pretty useful to you. Are there any questions at all, or does anyone want me to show any other functionality within this? I understand if people need to leave, but I've got some time available should you need any more information. If not, we'll call the webinar there. And as I say, I'll publish it. It'll be available probably from our YouTube page, and I'll link to that on LinkedIn and similar. But yeah, it doesn't look like anyone's got it. So everyone, that's great. Everyone fully understand everything. So hopefully this gives you some tools for going ahead and actually going and creating these screens if you need it, or creating these flows. And as I say, if you have any other questions, if you think of something afterwards, then just drop me a message. You can get me at peter.davis@tech4consulting.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, where you might have found the links to this, the Tech4 website. And as I say, have a look at that web API training course that I've just published on the Tech4 Learn World site. It's free, so you've got nothing to lose by going and having a look at that. But yeah, other than that, I will call it there. So yeah, thank you for all that. But yeah, if perhaps a mop-up session in a few weeks could be, yeah, if these have been useful, let me know, because I'd like to do more sessions like this, and potentially have this as a demo, and then allow people. I'd like to have some interactive sessions if people have questions and want to look at things, because I realize that not everyone has access to an ERPx environment. Not everyone can check in on AppStudio and figure out how it works. So if we can demo these things for you, then that works really good from my point of view, and gets the knowledge out there. So great. Thanks everyone for attending, and I will let you all get back to the rest of your afternoon. But thanks again, and I'll check in with you all later.